Morrato. She is the founding dean. I always have to read it, Elaine. Founding dean from the Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health at Loyola. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here, Elaine. I've been reading about the virus, prepping for this interview, trying, hoping to sound smart, and really, it's flipping confusing. So, you're here. Hi, good morning. Will you help us decode
The
what's?
good news is that there is a vaccine, and from everything we're seeing, it's highly effective. So this is something to celebrate. So we can break it down and what do we know and what don't we know, but it's exciting. 10 months from the start of all of this, we have a vaccine that's in the process of being distributed in the United States.
Well, let's talk about that before we move on to what it means. Last time we were together, you said you were hopeful by insane innovation. How crazy is it that we have a virus this quickly,
A
or
vaccine,
a
you mean?
vaccine this quickly?
Well, historically, the way vaccines are developed, they typically, you might hear like they'll take a live virus and make it less, weaken it, or they'll take the virus and deaden it. And, often like with flu vaccines, the technology was to then, do this in chicken eggs and stuff like that, to get ready for a vaccine in production. And so this could take years to develop a vaccine. I think I read that the quickest one was developed was maybe 4 years with a previous mumps rubella vaccine. Some diseases like AIDS still don't have a vaccine. And if you think of it in that context, to go from nothing to something in 10 months is pretty incredible. And it's not just 10 months, that's 10 months to have data. So the vaccine that just got approved, that it was manufactured by Pfizer, was tested in 44,000 individuals. So that is a massive clinical trial that was run at incredible speed as well. And then, of course, all of the number crunching and synthesizing of the information and reviewing it and all of that. So each step of the way has gone at very rapid pace. I don't know if that gives you
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
Normally, these things take years.
I think that what I heard was no vaccine for HIV, and they've been
Right.
trying for a while, and 4 years for like I'm kind of heard
A
4 years is
traditional
normal.
vaccine, right? The way we would develop it. Yeah.
Right. So this is crazy. Tell us, can you walk us through the news because it feels like FDA and now CDC they're in meetings or they just had meetings and
Yes.
what the heck?
Yeah. Okay. Let me start with who is the CDC and FDA? What is their responsibility,
Yeah,
right?
good.
That might help. So both of them are federal public health agencies. The FDA is Food and Drug Administration, and their job is to approve new drugs, new biologics, which vaccines fall into new biologics, and they authorize them so that the companies can distribute it to Americans. So their job is to make sure that it's safe and effective for its intended use, in this case, a vaccine, right? Um, their job is regulatory. Their job
Right.
is also to make sure what's being made is being made in a good way as well. So they also oversee how companies manufacture drugs and vaccines as well. Okay. The CDC stands for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and their job is to establish public health guidance around we've been seeing a lot in the news around safe measures to mitigate the coronavirus or COVID. So that includes things like washing hands and guidance around wearing masks, and of which vaccines are one of the tools that you would use for disease control and prevention. So the CDC looks to their colleagues at FDA, and FDA, you're the scientists. Can we trust that this vaccine's okay, that we can distribute it? Great. Now, my job is to make sure that our national public health workforce has guidance on safe and appropriate, how do we put vaccine into the whole game plan and what we're doing. The federal level establishes guidance and documents. It's up to the states to actually implement the public health measures. So what you're also hearing in the news is each state is figuring out its vaccine distribution plan for its own population. And part of the why we have it this way is because we have the way we have government. Our federal agencies give oversight on certain areas of authority in public health, and state agencies have other oversight and authority in local distribution. But the states look to the federal agencies for guidance. So that's why you hear in the news these advisory committees, because our federal agencies look to scientific experts to inform their decisions. So this Thursday, there was an advisory committee reviewing the data at FDA. There's another advisory committee that informs CDC around its vaccine schedules or recommendations. And so these two committees are made up of experts external that look at the data and say, thumbs up, thumbs down, here's how we would vote. And usually, because we have a transparent public health government, usually the federal agencies will follow what their advisory boards recommend. So, it sounds complicated, but it is very structured. And what we're seeing play out for these vaccines is following that structure. And here's how we safely evaluate information and make evidence-based decisions.
All right, so we're in a hurry, which means
Yeah.
are we still checking all the boxes? Is it going too
Yeah.
fast that scientists
Yeah.
are not?
So right. And so there's a balance, right, between you want to be able to be nimble and speedy to address a crisis or emergency, but you also don't want to be so speedy that you don't do all of the good quality assurance and control that we've built into our supply that we've trusted, right?
Yes, please.
Yes. And so I think what we're seeing in the vaccines is trying to find that right sweet spot, right? It's important to know that these companies didn't just create this from scratch, how they were designing and developing. Before it got to advisory committee in this late stages of the approval, the National Institutes of Health, the FDA scientists have been working very closely around the design and guidance on how the studies were to be conducted. Pfizer did 44,000 people in their trial. So these are massive studies. Moderna is the other vaccine that's going to be reviewed this week. I looked it up. They also had massive numbers of patients in their studies, so the 30,000 in their randomized controlled trials. So I would say we're still seeing rigor in the number of patients getting tested and therefore the evidence that's being generated. What we are doing is, I believe, the FDA, if you read it carefully, they're using their authority for emergency authorization. That's a little different than approval. It means maybe they're looking most closely at, given the evidence on the efficacy and the safety for what we know, we're going to give the authority to the company to begin distribution, knowing that we're going to be collecting information on long-term safety. That's usually what takes longer, is getting that long-term safety. And we're going to collect that in real time. So that's the balance. The balance is, we're going to collect that follow-up data in real time, recognizing that it's an emergency. But you would not have had all of the experts around the table reviewing this data give a thumbs up if they really were concerned around the safety. There were a couple who voted no, but it really had to do with, geez, should we approve at 16 and above or 18 above? How much data do we have on 16 and 17-year-olds? It's not because they necessarily said, I think this is unsafe, right? So that's what makes it hard, because you just see headlines on votes. You have to kind of peel back a little bit and say, okay, what was really the questions that particular member had? And having sat on advisory committees myself, sometimes it has to do with the way the FDA words their questions. And that doesn't always make the headline in a newspaper, right? They're going for black, white answers. So
right.
I would say everyone, it's in everyone's best interest not to put out something that doesn't work. And I think the companies are being very diligent on this as well.
Well, I'm always interested. I'm interested in two things from you. No, it's a long list, but on it are at least two things.
Yeah,
And we want this background, but I also want your opinion as just somebody who
yeah,
has a more informed.
yeah.
And what I'm hearing between the lines are 40,000 people in the test, and I didn't know that was huge, but I'm hearing that's huge, and that makes you feel
That's
good.
very huge.
And
Yeah.
I
You know
I
what?
didn't
The
think
average
about.
trial, yeah, for a drug, just to give you perspective, the guidance says you only need like 1,500 people followed for 6 months or 12 months.
Oh,
Right. I mean, so when we get drugs approved, most commonly, they're often, they're well done studies and controlled, but you do not have this degree of numbers of people. And vaccine trials are normally very large because what you're trying to do is give 22,000 people the active vaccine and 22,000 people get a placebo. And then you're going to look at the rate of COVID in both groups. And if COVID, transmission is low, it's you need these large numbers of people to get enough people who get it, and then to see a difference between the groups that got the vaccine and the groups that didn't. Um, and we care very much because vaccines are intended to be given for the entire population, not just like small groups of people that might have a particular illness. And so we care very, very much about the safety of these. So maybe I should just say this. I trust our federal public health system. Having worked at FDA, I trust that the scientists that looked at this did what they need to do. I trust that there was no politics going on in terms of some have argued like, well, why is it taking so long? It's because there we had a public advisory committee. We believe very strongly as a country that we want to have open and transparent review of the data. And in my mind, that was worth a couple of days
right.
to make sure we did it right. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned the politics. I read and
Yeah.
didn't fully understand. I think it was the political appointee at the FDA was pushing to get it done yesterday, get it done Friday. Is that
Yes.
significant, or like I'm hearing from you I'm hearing happiness and upbeat. So, but does that kind of stuff matter that a political non-scientist is pushing the scientists?
Okay. So I think you're referring to the FDA commissioner, right? As the political appointee. All right. So he is a physician. He's an oncologist. He previously came from MD Anderson, right? So yes, it's a political appointee, but these are people who understand science. And FDA was working closely with the National Institutes of Health too. Yes, there's pressure and tension to move things forward quickly. Yes, that stuff happens. That stuff happens all of the time. I think what we're seeing now is that it's in the news that people are tracking it, but there's always that tension on priorities and not. Um, but the colleagues I worked with at FDA, they're gonna stand there and say what's safe and what's effective, and I trust them.
So far for me, this is very good news. I'm not hearing any ambivalence or hedging. I'm hearing from you like, hey, heck yeah, this is good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was looking up, well, what is this? The Pfizer and the Moderna are what's called an mRNA vaccine. And so I was reading a little bit on that as well. Um, and so this type of research or technology is currently being used as another strategy to treat cancer, right? So it's this idea of giving a little piece of mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA, and this is in our bodies and it codes for proteins. This is how we make all of the parts of our bodies. Um, and our enzymes and anything that's a protein in our body. And so these vaccines are basically teaching our body to do what it normally does, which is to have an immune response. And in this case, the little protein that they're making relates to the little spike on the coronavirus. That's why it's called a coronavirus. It's a crown. And, this is highly effective. And it's being used as a strategy for cancer as well, like how to, target certain cancer cells. So, there's a lot that's been known. Now, what is unknown is how are we going to distribute all of this, and challenges the production of it. to meet the demand. Because normally you have more of a lead time for production. I think the other piece is we're not the only one in the world that's wanting this vaccine. And so what you're seeing at a global scale is competitive market
Right.
dynamics to who has money to pay and who's put down money and that. So that'll be what we're going to see in the news more than this, I think, more than the safety of or efficacy of it. It's going to be how do we get the logistics and product supply?
All right. Well, I have a million questions.
Yes.
Efficacy. So, last time we were together, you told me that a typical flu vaccine is way less effective than what we're seeing
Yeah.
for these. Like, I think you said 60% is really great for a flu,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we're at 90 or 95%. Is that,
Yes.
for me, that's
That's
confusing.
how's it? Yeah. Say
Well,
more.
because if
Why
the
are you?
flu, we've had plenty of time to think about just a flu vaccine, and we're only at
Yeah.
60% on a good year, but yet we
Yeah.
have no time with this, and we're at 90 or 95%.
Oh, I see. So can this really be true? You're
Yeah,
asking.
and that's it. And
Yeah.
why aren't we better at flu vaccines then?
Okay. Well, there's different strategies for vaccines. And what we're seeing is this messenger RNA strategy can be extremely effective. Um, we also, you might say, when we think of flu vaccine every given year, we're balancing not just effectiveness, but also cost and convenience and distribution, right? So you probably saw in the news that this mRNA, the Pfizer one has to be in this super Arctic cold
Yeah.
train all the way through that. Well, that's pretty expensive, right? If we want to get Santa's sleigh from North Pole to us and make sure that it never got cold, that's not an easy distribution. And so in public health, sometimes you trade off the efficacy side of things if it's easier to distribute to more people. And then, frankly, there's market dynamics. If 60 to 70% of flu vaccine is good enough for our population control, then that's good enough. But for COVID, we're wanting the best because most of us have not been exposed to it. And so we want to make sure, given the significance of it as well, it's 4 times worse than the flu. We really want to, stick the landing on the first one. I think also what we're seeing here is the mRNA could be developed most quickly using that strategy.
Hmm.
And so that's the first out of the gate. Over time, we're going to see different ones in the marketplace. And we'll see how the future advisory committees will be saying which one of these vaccines should be first line vaccine versus second line. Right now, what we have is the only line. And so by definition, it's first line. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I don't know if that cleared it up,
No,
but yeah.
what I'm hearing is it's just a constant balance, and market forces, and it depends on what's available. And right now,
Yeah.
Pfizer is available.
Right.
But let's talk about the ones behind it. Here's
Yes.
what I read 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah.
This author, please don't ask me who, but
Well,
the
no.
point was once one or two vaccines come out, market forces will change that make it harder for the trailing vaccines to make it to the world. And the possibility could exist that those trailing vaccines might be cheaper or better, or for some reason have some advantage. Is
Right.
this happening right now? And can you teach us what's going on with the trailing companies who are desperately trying to get it out?
Yeah. Here's what I think is going to happen is I think we're going to likely have to have like booster revaccination campaigns, right? So,
Which means,
uh, which means like, recommendations for annual flu shot. Now, partly that's driven because the mix of the flu virus changes each year. Um, but we already know, like for measles, rubella, MMR vaccines, the children get that early. Then you have to get a booster, when you're going into kindergarten or sixth grade, et cetera. So everyone's going to be focusing on what does the decay of your immune response look like? And if this is like a normal cold virus, your decay, and they've been tracking this with people who've naturally gotten COVID. Some data shows that by a few months, you have half the amount of antibodies, or half the people are
Yeah.
affected
Can I
or
just
still.
stop you right now? I don't.
Yeah,
You lost me a little bit.
I'm glad. Yeah. All
Um.
right. So, all right. So, market forces, I think we're going to always need to be having COVID vaccination for quite some time. And so I think that you have the first ones out of the gate, make a lot of money getting everyone vaccinated the first time. It's not going to reach everybody because of these special conditions. Supply, we're only getting 40 million doses, and that's only for 20 million people. We have 330 million Americans, right? So supply. But I think we're going to need to have booster vaccination occurring over time. And that might give opportunity for these follow-up vaccines that might have advantages because they're easier to use or easier to distribute or have different strategies. Their cost is more efficient. These first ones are very expensive. That's not a great strategy if you're trying to sustain immunization, sustain your immune response over time.
See, that was a good answer right there.
Was that a
Thank
better
you.
answer?
Thank you for
Yeah.
making it. I.
Yeah, so think of it, maybe we don't vaccinate, we'll have to see what the experts say, but maybe we don't vaccinate children right away. And maybe we want to have certain kind of vaccine that's different for children than it is for adults. But each year, more people are being born. It doesn't mean just because we're vaccinated that coronavirus goes away. No, it's there. We're going to have waves of new generations being vaccinated. And that might open up opportunities for these other
Right.
vaccines to have a special role.
And do you think, Elaine, for those trailing companies, the people who still have a good idea and they think it can happen, but are they going to have more trouble getting their studies done? Because, for example, if they call me and say, Brad, you want to be in my study? I'm going to say, I would just prefer the one that is out now. Is that just what Muggles think about, or is that real?
No, that's a real issue. Yeah. I mean, if you want to look at it in the beginning, there are some people writing about that it's the rich countries that had the resources are the ones that are able to do the trials and are able to distribute first. So if you think about, let's say, Ebola vaccination development,
Mm-hmm.
you can only test it in humans if it's out there, right? The whole trial is to say, am I preventing you from getting sick if you become exposed to it? And if we have, so you have to do the vaccine trials where there's enough prevalence or enough of that virus naturally circulating to do a trial. So this will be a problem for future ones.
Does that mean that the companies with those trailing diseases are going to end up at in countries with less money to find their volunteers?
Or maybe less money might mean they weren't able to afford the really expensive ones,
Right.
or they couldn't pay to get first in line for the really expensive ones. And so, but I heard an expert, talking about the whole vaccine development, and there are groups that specifically develop vaccines for under-resourced communities and nations. So their strategy is from the start is to develop something that can be given where you don't have to worry about these super cold refrigerators. It's a much cost-effective vaccine, and that's been their strategy from day one. And we just aren't hearing about them in the news because they're percolating along in parallel.
All right. Well,
It'll be interesting. I'm not a vaccine expert to see how the market dynamics will play out over time. But I think it's important to remember just because we're vaccinated doesn't mean it goes away. And that's where a lot of the discussion has been around measles. Some people say, I don't want my child to get measles vaccination.
right.
And then you see outbreaks of measles. That measles is still in our world. So we will have coronavirus in our world. And some say we still have circulating remnants of the 1918 flu, right? It's just it doesn't go away. What we're trying to do is build up our immune response so humans can ward it off and not as many people are as affected by it.
Of course, eventually I'm going to ask you, when do you think we all get to go to a concert, or in my case, a convention? I've been to a
Yeah.
few conventions, but tell me first, before we leave the development of this, what's up with Russia? Do you have I know you have
I don't
insight to the
know.
American system, not to the Russian system, so I know that. But
Yeah.
can you extrapolate?
I've not been following that, so I don't want to comment. What are you hearing?
Well, what I hear is that they didn't do the third stage of the tests, and Putin doesn't want to take it himself.
I just saw that AstraZeneca is partnering with Russia.
I
So
saw
I'm
that
not
too.
quite sure. I'm not as well, I not read up on all of that to understand what's going on. I
Yeah,
don't know.
the whole thing is fascinating. I read there was a company in Australia that already washed out because they weren't effective for older citizens. How common is that? That because it seems like a crapshoot. You're a big company. You worked for P&G. You take a product to market, and
Yeah,
that doesn't
well,
make it.
uh, very, very common, right? I mean, even when you go into what they'll call late stage clinical development, they might call it for drugs phase 3. Um, even at that point, I think there's a huge drop off. I'm trying to remember their statistics on it. At each stage, how many candidates fall off, even at the point in which you're submitting to FDA for approval. I think only 85% or something like that gets eventually approved. So
Well, that's
um,
higher than I would have guessed.
that's what I mean. That's what makes the fact that this vaccine made it through like incredible, because that's just natural. That's always happening, and that's a good thing. That's why we have drug development. It used to be, let's say, 100 years ago. Um, we gave drugs to people without doing that. And we would just say, hey, this looks good to me. Sounds good. Let's just give it.
Give it a shot.
We'll
It'll
see
be
how it goes.
it'll be awesome.
Right. And that's why we have regulation, because it's not always awesome. And usually there's tragedies. So the fact that we have vaccines not working is a good thing. That means our system's working and screening out bad stuff, so it doesn't get to us as humans.
You you mentioned that we're not going to get rid of it. It's going to be around just
Yeah.
like the measles.
Yeah.
Um, how many of us need a vaccine before
Yeah.
it helps? For example, I read in the New York Times today that the Cleveland Clinic is disappointed because they're only going to get 1,000 doses, which is 500 people because they have to give it twice, and they have
Yes.
40,000 employees. So the question in my head was like, is that worthless? Because it sounds almost like you're not having any vaccine. So how many of those 40,000 people, how many of their people need it? And for us in the world,
Yeah.
what percentage of our 330 million people need it?
Million. Yeah. So the best estimate is somewhere between right around 70%. The best estimates are about 70% of Americans need to have immunity. There's an estimate that maybe up near 10% of Americans, well, what's the latest numbers today? 10% of Americans have had coronavirus, right? So, or been exposed. So I just looked it up, we have about 15, 16 million Americans right now that have had the disease.
And what's the
Uh,
latest? If I get coronavirus, am I safe from future coronavirus?
yeah, so one of the questions that's not answered right now, and I think the scientists are trying to look at, is let's say you've had it, should you get a vaccine? How
What's the
long
answer?
will your immunity last? So there are studies going on right now saying, of all the people who had coronavirus, let me follow them over time and see what their antibodies start to look at over time. And that will give us information that we might use to predict what will happen after the vaccine as well.
That is the classic Brad and Elaine question. I say, "What about this?" And you say, "Hold your horses. We will look at data, and then we will know." We don't just shoot off. We don't just blab.
Yeah. Some of the preliminary data is suggesting, as I said, within 3 months you see a drop off. Now the question is, that's the antibodies in your blood that they're looking at. There are other parts of your immune response, like T cells, that don't get picked up in when they do that sort of antibody or immune response kind
Right.
of assays. And so that's the question, like to what degree, if they're kind of hidden in your cell and they're ready to jump into fight if they're seeing it, how long those things last. So that there's a lot of unknown around that. But what we do know is that people are this vaccine works for at least 2-3 month follow-up. But
All right.
that, yeah, it's not a cure, right? We have to stay nimble and keep learning.
Well, when we, I'm going to warn you. Last time I asked you what gives you hope, and that will still be our last question.
Yeah,
And I am holding it to the end. I do want to ask you the when questions.
yeah.
But first, I want to just go back to living in a time of COVID. Since you and I talked last, the numbers have gone up in every community, it seems.
Yeah.
Have you changed your personal behavior? Like, did you do things 2 months ago that you're not doing now? Are you
Uh,
advising your kids to do less things than you used to tell them?
yes. Well, first of all, I after we talked last time, you were asking me, is this riskier than that's riskier, right? I found a really cool figure, and I'm happy to pull it up if you'd like and share. It's a really nice visual to give you a sense of, like, this is riskier than this is, and here's some good tips to think through, right? Um, I we are not Now, I live in Chicago, and Chicago has taken a robust stance on what they're doing and allowing to be open and stuff like that, right? So I already was not going into work, right? So I was already social distancing there. We did change. We're not going out to restaurants anymore. We were going out to restaurants that were outdoors.
Hmm.
Um, Now it's winter time in
I
Chicago,
was
so
gonna say it's
no,
December in
we wouldn't have
Chicago.
done
That's
that.
an easy one.
Yeah, I'm just saying, everyone, you can see everyone when they're out. I've noticed people when they're walking, even on the streets, were wearing masks. Whereas maybe in the fall, I'd say, hey, I'm walking, there's no one around me, maybe I don't need a mask. Um, so I think everyone's behavior is a bit more masked. In Chicago, if I want to go to like my Starbucks, right? I can't. They're controlling how many people can be in that building at once when I'm going in, or going to the grocery store. So I'm naturally doing that without having to think about it. But that makes me feel better, right? When I go to the grocery store, it's not with 1,000 people, 2 feet from me, all
Right.
wearing a mask. We're spaced out. Now, tonight we're going to the Botanic Garden in Chicago, and they have an outdoor Christmas light thing. We have timed entry, it's outdoors, we're wearing masks. I'm still doing it, right?
Yeah, that gives.
Yeah,
I love hearing that, Elaine, because
yeah, you
hearing
know,
you say everything. You were so clear last time we talked. Everything has a risk. Nothing is totally safe. But I'm
yeah,
going to the Botanic Gardens. That
right,
makes me happy. You're not hunkered down, ordering in your groceries and.
right. Okay, so
Uh oh.
I'll share a personal thing. I went to get my nails done yesterday.
Oh, tell me everything. Well, first of all,
Yes.
let's see them.
So, yeah. No, they're on my toes, so I won't
Oh.
show you. But I thought about it and I said, okay, there was no one in there, right? I went to them last summer, and they have an extremely great protocol. They take your temperature when you walk in. They ask you to wash your hands before you sit down. I'm observing them constantly cleaning. It's a very large salon, and so we're all spaced out, and everyone is wearing a mask. And I say, okay, in that context, I'm going to do it. But I made a conscious decision. I did evaluate, and there is some risk because now I'm in contact with someone, for a certain amount of time. There's data coming out around schools, Brad, and the data looks very encouraging. There's a lot of information collected at universities. The transmission of COVID is not happen. It does not appear to be happening in the classrooms or via the class environment. So that would suggest that spacing, wearing masks, good hygiene, in a work setting like that is is safe, right? And where the transmission is happening is when people are either in small group gatherings, having dinners, people having parties, and you take your masks off and you're in close proximity. So I think we're learning a lot more around I feel different now. I was thinking about this. I feel different now than I did last April. Last April, you go to the grocery store and I felt like I was on edge and I didn't want to touch anything. Now I feel like, okay, I know these tools that we're using, like distancing and masks, are effective. And so I'm cautious, but I feel more comfortable.
I don't know why it makes me so happy knowing you got your nails done.
Here, can I
Although,
show you a picture? Yeah, I'm
although
going to
in
show
two
you.
weeks, if you come down with it, I'm gonna All right.
Yeah, I know. It's not, I say this about medicines as well, right? Just because something's approved by FDA doesn't mean you can't get a side effect. If you couldn't have a side effect, it wouldn't be a drug, right? I mean, so you always need to think of it as the benefit and the risk. And for you, is it worth it given what what you're trying to do? So if it's, you always have to kind of make that mental calculation.
um, uh, can I ask you two personal things? The questions are going to
Yeah,
be:
yeah,
would you do this?
yeah.
Would you go to Skate City hockey in Denver, Colorado, or Skate City and play hockey with? There'd be 6 men on the rink and a few others not breathing heavy.
Breathing heavy, and
In my case, breathing really heavy.
and what do people do with mask wearing?
Oh, no masks.
I would not do that.
I knew you were going to say that, but I wanted to ask. What about this? Let's just pretend asking for a
So
friend.
I was reading, and I think I saw that all of these different athletes had different bubbles. The NBA or the
Right.
Major League Baseball. I think hockey had some of the hardest, most difficulty. Now I don't know if that's just because it's hockey and close proximity like this. You know, um, it's colder. You're on ice, and so maybe how the virus. I don't know, but
Well, I called him. I probably wrote. Of course, this is me. But they said, "Oh, we got the doors open, Brad." I'm like, I, I don't know. That's how
it's
many
a
doors you
personal
got?
risk decision. If you were Brad that was 22, that's different than Brad that's my age at 55.
We are so young. All right. One of the things I love. Okay, not me. Asking for a friend, Elaine. Pretend
Yeah,
you have a friend who looks similar to me, who just loves to go into a little room and lie on a little bed and have someone give them a massage.
yeah.
They just called me and said, Brad, we are open, we are safe. And I thought I'll probably just ask Elaine on this one. It doesn't feel safe to me. What do you think?
Well, what do you know about the salon? What are they
Well,
doing for their COVID prevention?
what they are saying they do is clean the heck out of that room between um, customers, and there's mask wearing. But you're in a small room, like it's a small
Yeah,
room with one
yeah,
other person, and you're there for quite a while. At least an hour, and let's just face it, more is better.
yes. No, I like massages as well. Um, you know, I don't think I would do that one right now. With
Uh,
everything, maybe if it was like in the, if things were very low being transmitted, maybe I might think about it. But we're surging right now, and it's around. And so
yeah,
I think the difference for me versus getting my nails done is that was a very large salon in which it was just a very large space. Um, and um, and I think also not the same close contact proximity. I mean, it's someone working on my my toes as opposed to
right.
massage all over the body.
Well, plus there's the exposure time, right? I've never
And
had my
time,
nails
yeah,
done, but I'm assuming that is not very long.
yes,
All right, well, let's get to the win. So I know you don't know. I know you don't have the right answer, but also I know that you are more educated and informed than the rest of us. I saw somebody in the White House said we're going to have people inoculated by second quarter next year. I read that
yeah, the
Fauci thought that
timing.
it might be. I'm at least going to be eligible to get a shot by April. What is this? What does all that mean? And when do we get to? When am I going to get to speak in front of an audience again?
Yeah. Well, I'm on, I'm in a society of pharmacoepidemiologists. These are people who care about epidemiology of medicines, right? And in this group are people from around the world, and many of them are on planning committees for their countries, thinking about the vaccine distribution for their country. And we asked that exact question this week. We were planning our annual conference that has, a couple thousand people, was going to be in Seattle and was planned for August. And we had to decide by the end of this month, are we going to be in person or virtual? What do you think we decided?
I think you totally went virtual.
Yes, for two reasons. Just the collective of people said the distribution of the vaccine it will be summer, fall. I think by the time we get a sufficient number of people. Now that may go faster, but we're just seeing a lot of things in the news around about supply and distribution that it's going to be challenging. Just like what you heard in the Cleveland Clinic, right? It's a little unpredictable. The other piece is, I brought up is you have to think about where the conference is going to be and how that in the United States, at least, each state is setting its own policies, right? And in this particular case, it was in Washington, and Washington State tends to be more conservative and more likely to probably still have restrictions on large crowd sizes. So, all right, maybe a small meeting of 50 in a large enough room, might be something that could be worked for, but not a convention size thing. We might imagine until there's really good evidence that case transmission is really low, would we say no? So we had to make a decision on this financially by end of this month. Maybe
Elaine,
we made the wrong call, but
what's the name of
that's
that
what's happening
organization?
is the International Society of Pharmacoepidemiology. Now, admittedly, this is our recommendation. They haven't made a formal decision. I don't know what's been communicated officially yet. We were just advising.
Yeah, but what's fascinating to me when I heard you do the calculus and the
Yeah,
reasoning behind one of
yeah,
them was what percentage of the attendees would be, or the humans, I guess, would be have it in our bodies. But the second one was the practical stance of what would the rules be of that particular state. I'm
yeah,
totally fascinated that you guys as scientists are taking into account that second one, the rules
yeah.
and what that state
Oh,
and what the
the other
hotel and
one that I didn't mention is we are scientists that work for government agencies. So in our association is FDA, the European Medicines Association agency, and other around the world, Canada and others. Um, we work at companies and we work at universities, and each one of those organizations is going to have travel policy. and whether or not they want their employees traveling at all, as well as, going to a conference of that kind of size. So I think you're going to see wide variability in that, depending how the companies are assessing the risk themselves and what proportion of their employees have been vaccinated. And we have to remember who the majority of Americans are. I did the calculator. I think I'm 134 millionth in line or something like
Oh, you're
that,
twice as
right?
close as me.
Yeah. Maybe it's because I clicked teacher. I can't remember. Maybe I'm 234 million. Frankly, I was so far at the end, I didn't worry about it. So, I mean, the reality is, who are the people that go to conferences? They're middle-aged working professionals.
Right.
So we're at the end of the line.
Well, that's the decision that gives me a pause. Is that if I have an organization and I'm considering whether or not to send my top scientists or my top administrators or my top performers or my top salespeople, it would be very hard for me to say it's worth it. Like, I don't know what this. I don't know if they're going to get it, but it's not worth it. I can't lose those people. I can't have them in quarantine. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
Would
Each company is going to make its own benefit risk determination. You told me that there are some places that are wanting you to speak right now, right? They're wanting you to come in January or February.
Yeah, I just had a really large medical association or healthcare association scheduled live in June. This will be the third time they've postponed it. And that you can imagine the call like, okay, how about this
Well,
one? Can you do that? And I'm thinking June.
now in that setting, they're the first responders that are getting vaccinated.
No, these
So
are well, I hadn't
they're
thought about it.
healthcare
These are
workers.
administrators though. These are not providers.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know where administrators fit in the triaging, but they're at healthcare centers. So
I had
they may actually be further along. If they could assure you that, don't worry, we expect by June that 80%, whatever percentage of us will be vaccinated.
let's say,
It's all a benefit risk, and it's hard to predict. I would say,
curses. Ah.
June, we're getting a lot of pushback at our university not to do commencement in person in May. I'll be honest. I think many of us are skeptical that we'll be able to distribute the vaccine as rapidly as we'd like, but maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised. So,
Is your gut that Loyola will feel normal with kids on campus and in dorms and in dining halls next fall?
I think we will, just like many universities have brought people on campus. I think people will be more comfortably on campus next fall. Yes. Will it be? Yes. Will it be back to normal? No masks. I don't know on that. In my mind, it depends on how well we do in the vaccination and what we learn about how long the vaccines hold. But we already have universities open, so I might imagine that there might still be some mask wearing policies or things like that. Some social distancing requirements, but they would be a lot less than what we have right now.
Yay!
Yeah, no, yeah. So it's all now. Another assumption, Brad, is that people get vaccinated. So it's not just a distribution. It also means people have to feel comfortable to get vaccinated. We already know that some people are concerned about vaccines and safety. The evidence would not support that, but nonetheless, people are concerned. There's hesitancy because, just like you were saying, can I trust this? Was it politically influenced? We know that there's hesitancy among certain populations, people of color, that historically haven't been well represented in trials. And when they are, there's a long history of ethical I won't say abuse, but ethical issues and how people of color have been included in various research studies. And so there's a real lack of trust in that. And so this will influence, even if it's available, how many people will get the shot. And
Yeah.
so depending on how that plays out, these are all individual decisions. We're not in a military society in which everyone is forced to vaccinate. And we'll see different legal, the next round will be legal things. Can you force me to have to be vaccinated? And different states will have different policies
Right.
because they have different policies right now. And that'll just make it confusing.
I
So
kind of predict that. I don't know about the forcing, but I do feel like organizations will be able to hold out and say, unless you can prove you have received this, then I will. I am not going to serve you. Airplanes and conventions and movie theaters.
yeah,
Like, you want to come in, prove it.
that'll be the next round of legal battles.
Yeah. All right, I'm about to ask you, Hope, but
Yeah,
quickly,
well, I mean, no, seriously, I mean, this is an area of contentious. We're seeing it play out in real time, like elected politicians and boards of health and that can enact emergency requirements when we're in a pandemic or that. But it's also a social political will, and people are balking at that. And if people balk at that, then we live in a society that's a democracy, and we see that tension play out. I mean, what a shame that we have public health people that are trying to look at all of this and figure out what's the right thing to do, and they're getting death threats. I mean,
I know.
that's just a travesty.
Well,
So
as a scientist, what's your take on that woman in Florida that built that dashboard and got fired, and now cops came to her house? That must be horrifying for scientists to look at that.
it is, because most scientists go into their position saying, you know, data is truth. Set us free. Just share the data. Make it transparent. Let's understand it. Let's communicate it. Let's understand it. So a scientist views data as valuable, and so you don't go into science thinking that you're going to be like vilified for it. So that is very scary.
Yeah, we are just
And
in.
some people are concerned whether or not people want to go into health professions or scientific data professions right now. A lot of the frontline workers, nurses and physicians you're seeing in the news are, you know, it's an extremely difficult time. And so it's very hurtful to see people, not taking these things seriously or thinking they're making it up. Um, it'd be like saying you go to war and you're seeing all of this war happening. You come back and you say, you just made that up. That's not there. It's all in your head. I mean, that will have long-standing trauma for us collectively. So that's the sad part of all of this. Doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, my gut says you're right that it's gonna take a while for the CDC and by association the FDA and anything related to healthcare and science to get back to the place where I feel like we were not very long ago, which muggles like me just said, "Oh, they said it was this, so I guess it is."
Right.
Instead, we're
Well,
that,
historically, they're like the Pew Trust, or they do annual or regular polling of American and ask them questions around do you trust various organizations, kind of like a poll of credibility. And they've been doing it, I guess, since the 60s, 1960s or 50s, and they've seen a steady decline in American trust in our federal government. But usually CDC and FDA have remained very strong. Most people trust it and believe it. And they've seen a really rapid decline during the pandemic in people trusting these agencies because they're fearful that they've become politicized. Maybe that'll change in our new administration, maybe, but that takes time to build back trust too.
yeah, I agree.
But then again, we have short memories. So maybe Americans will just move on. you know, um, we had the 1920s roaring 20s, people got past the 1918 pandemic too.
Yeah, gosh, wouldn't that be nice if we had the roaring 2022s?
Yeah, 2020s. Wouldn't that be great?
I'll take it. Dr. Elaine Morrato, what gives you hope? My gut tells me you're going right back to where you started, but I don't know. What gives you hope right now?
Yeah. Well, I think what gives me hope is that our public health institutions are doing their job. They're updating guidance, and we have data coming in. And frankly, the fact that we as American citizens, if everyone wants to look at it, can by a click of a button go to the FDA's website and see all of the data that was presented publicly to the experts, presented by the company, presented by FDA, and we all can see that. I mean, that's what makes, I think, our American system really cool, right? And the fact that that data is now published in New England Journal of Medicine or in Lancet, it goes under rigorous peer review. This is what gives me trust that the scientists are doing their job. And now we just need the distribution channel and politicians to do their job. So that's where I'm less hopeful, but I am very hopeful that the science will keep pushing through ways to improve and get ourselves past this. What gives you hope, Brad?
Go science. Oh, well, honestly, Elaine, it does make me feel so much better just to hear you say. Last time we talked about innovation, and you talked about how during this conversation how these were real tests. Like we didn't just run this to market. You feel comfortable that this thing's the
Yeah,
real deal. And then hearing you say kind of that you feel like science is winning, and that makes me happy. Like you
I'm a
believe in
scientist.
science. I love
You
that.
know, what could we do better, right? So how is it? That's why I enjoyed these discussions. How do we communicate the science in a way that's credible and believable and a steady beat of that. There's a lot of misinformation out there. That's what saddens me. People who are spreading misinformation faster than good information. And so, I trust the FDA's website. I trust the CDC's website. I trust the New York Times and how they have their coronavirus tracker. They're building off of the data that Hopkins is tracking. I trust the infrastructure that is there to help us. And so that's what gives me comfort.
Well, I kind of think you maybe should take a page from Dr. Fauci, and from what I saw, a couple healthcare leaders in Mississippi. The three of them at least said, "Oh, it'll be very public when I get a vaccination. There will be cameras rolling."
Yes.
And
Yeah.
maybe Dr. Elaine Morrato from Parkinson ought to be on camera getting that
On
shot,
camera.
girl.
Yeah. Yeah. Way down the line. Yes.
Well, whenever they give it to
Right.
you, put
Yeah.
that on.
Right. This is a good thing. It's sort of like we wear little stickers that say I voted. I think it's incredible that former presidents have all made that pledge. So when President Bush, Obama, and Clinton, they're all going to be there publicly doing it. It's showing people that this is something to believe. And we should be proud about it.
That's a good
Yeah.
place to end.
Yeah.
Thank
Going
you,
into
Dr.
I
Elaine
mean,
Morrato.
yes. Thank you very much, Brad Montgomery, for continuing the conversation.
Hold with me right here. We're logging out. Everybody, thanks.
And